This session is licensing Oracle and SQL Server on vSphere. My name is Scott Salyer. I work for VMware. And this is Dave Welch from House of Brick. Standard disclaimer. You've seen this on all the slides, so I'm not going to go over it. A little bit about my background. I've been with VMware for 11 years now. Started in May of '07. This is my 11th year speaking at VMworld. I used to do the real technical stuff like SQL Server best practices, Exchange best practices, but got a little rusty on my skills, so I stuck with licensing, and nobody else in the company wants to do licensing, so here I am today. I also was the author of the original white papers that you see listed there, the SQL Server Best Practices Guide and Availability and Recovery Options. That's mostly my formatting that we've updated over the years, but that's my background. I spent 20 years in Microsoft consulting before coming to VMware, and I've been here for the last 7. So, Dave?
Yeah, I'm going to delay my introduction till my segment here. Okay. So the format is 20 minutes of Scott on SQL Server on VMware, 20 minutes of me on Oracle on VMware, and then a full 20 minutes of Q&A. This particular licensing session has a very active, very lively Q&A. So for pacing, we're going to leave it like that. And so Scott, take it away.
Okay. All right, so we want to make some statements about licensing in general, because we're talking about Microsoft and Oracle here. They're not part of VMware. The first thing I want to say is that software vendors deserve the total licensing fees that the individual contracts that the customers of those vendors have signed require. We're not disputing any of that. We're just trying to tell you about the rules of the game, how to take advantage of the rules of the game to optimize your environment and optimize your costs. We also recommend 100% that you adhere to the licensing policies of Oracle and Microsoft or any other software vendor that you're working with. So starting out with SQL Server licensing, let me get a raise of hands. How many of you are here primarily for SQL Server? Okay, yeah, a little more than half, thank you. And I'm curious your backgrounds. I know a lot of you are vSphere admins. Who's a vSphere admin? A lot of folks. Any DBAs or application developers or application admins? Okay, fantastic. All right, thank you for that. That helps me understand the audience a bit. So here's an overview, and I'll dive more deeply into some of the elements on here, but to give you kind of a big picture view of what we're going to be talking about. First of all, I've linked the 2017 licensing guide there for your convenience. I've also linked the product licensing page, which includes the product terms document. That is an excellent resource to find out, really detailed characteristics of licensing and how you can use those. With SQL Server, you can think of it pretty simply as 2 production licensing models. You've got Server Cal, and you've got per core. So, and we'll go over these in a lot more detail, but Server Cal requires a server license and a client access license, whereas per core, they charge you by the number of cores that you are licensing for SQL Server. One important point that I'm going to bring out many times in this presentation is this. When virtual machines move, licenses don't necessarily move with them, especially when it comes to databases. This has a very long history that precedes VMware. Way before VMware, back in the 90s, customers were buying SQL Server, and they would buy them for their American data center, and they were transferring those licenses to Europe, and then when they're done with the workday, they're transferring those licenses to APJ. And so Microsoft said, you guys are paying 1/3 of what you should pay. We're going to put this rule called the 90-day rule in place. And what that 90-day rule says, I can only transfer a license once every 90 days, except in the case of hardware failure. So I can't just do what we call follow the clock licensing to kind of maximize my investment. I actually have to be careful about moving those licenses from server to server. Now, where this caused an issue, VMware comes along, we're going to virtualize SQL Server. We've got vMotion. Now, if I'm vMotioning from server to server to server, I'm breaking the 90-day rule. Microsoft, we used to call that, back in the early days, we used to call that the vMotion tax. Because if I vMotioned a SQL Server from one server to the next, back then, I had to license both. Microsoft, thankfully, has changed all that with software assurance. They've given us license mobility rights, and I'll explain to you over the next few slides how those rights work, and you can avoid that vMotion tax that we were talking about. One other interesting point, and most folks don't know this, but software assurance is required for license mobility, but you can vMotion without software assurance in a very limited case. We'll go over that in the high density virtualization option. Oh, and let me make one more point. Sorry. You can license by VM in either model, either server cal or per core. If you're doing, so either model works there, and we'll go over those options. The first thing we'll talk about is server cal licensing. Is anybody not familiar with server cal licensing? To see how detailed I'll get into this. Okay, good. We'll just go over it pretty quickly then. So enterprise server cal is possible, but is not available for new agreements. If you don't already have it, you won't get it. It's also got a maximum on it. If you do enterprise server cal, you're maxed out at 20 cores and 128 gigabytes of memory. The other thing is that you can use existing cals with previous agreements, but you can't add new cals. Enterprise server cal is being sunsetted. Of course, we've got customers that are grandfathered. You may be one of those customers, but these restrictions apply. For new agreements, you must use standard edition for server cal licensing. And you're limited to a lesser of either 4 sockets or 24 cores with standard edition. A client access license, or a CAL, will allow any user or device to connect to an unlimited number of SQL servers. So it's really good for environments that have very few users and a lot of SQL servers. CAL licenses can be applied again to the user or to a device. You may have task workers that come in and do shifts on the same computer. So it might be best to apply that CAL to the computer rather than the user themselves. The only option you have in virtualized environments with server cal licensing is to you cannot license the host. You have to license the VMs. So you might think there's a nice loophole. I do a server license for the host. I'll stack a bunch of VMs on it. It doesn't work that way. It has to be licensed by VM for server cal. And software assurance is required for license mobility. So if I have a server license assigned and I have my cal for the user, if I have SA, then I can move that VM anywhere I would like. It gives me my license mobility rights. Obviously, the amount of cals you have purchased today will help you make the decision on whether server cal is the right solution for you. So let's get into the more common use case, which is per core licensing. And you have 2 basic options here. You have per core licensing by virtual machine or per core licensing by host. If we apply the license to the virtual machine, here are some of those characteristics. So keep in mind, so you need a core license for each virtual core. So if a virtual machine has 8 virtual cores in it, obviously I need 8 licenses. But there's a restriction on the minimum number of licenses you can purchase, and that's 4. You guys may start to see the problem here, because every SQL server doesn't need 4 cores. Okay, so what I run the risk of with this model, one of the downfalls is that low utilization of the VM could result in unused license capacity. So if I license by VM, I need to be very careful that those VMs are being 100% or let's say 75% utilized. Some of the advantages though, the VM can move freely across the server farm. It's great for mixed environments. We see all kinds of different servers here. We've got a database server, a file server, a web server. It's ideal for mixed environments. That workload can move wherever you like with software assurance, and it's an easy way to account for licensing. The biggest drawback is make sure that your VM is utilized. So let's use a per VM licensing example. Rainpole Bank is our fictional customer. We have 50 VMs for the whole company. Out of that 50 VMs, 5 of them are running SQL Server. 4 of the SQL Server VMs are in AAG clusters, and one is standalone. Each SQL Server is configured with 4 vCPUs, and we're seeing 70% utilization, nice healthy utilization for that VM during peak hours. And each of our ESX hosts has 32 physical cores. If we put every SQL Server we have on that ESX host, we still would not fill it up. So what's the best solution here? Anybody guess? License by VM per core. The reason is we can't fill up an entire host. We want to maximize our licensing investment. We license by VM. We spread those VMs across the servers for maximum availability. And we purchase SA to make sure they can move anywhere within the server farm. So I think the main example, or the main point I want to call out here is if you don't have enough SQL servers to fill an entire host, this is probably the best way to go. Now, the other option is to license by host. This is the traditional way to do it. If you license by host, you have to license every core on the host. You can't do partial licensing. Once all the cores on the ESX host are licensed, you have a couple of options here. You've got with SA and without SA. Let's look at without SA first. Without SA, your rights allow you to run the number of VMs equal to the number of cores on the host. It doesn't matter how many virtual cores the VMs have. If I have 8 cores on the host, I can run 8 VMs. If I have 16 cores, I can run 16 VMs. This is without SA. It also applies to containers. If I license the entire host, I can run 16 containers on a 16-core host. So as long as the target server has valid licenses, I can move things around. So when you're licensing by host, we're not thinking about license mobility in the traditional sense. We're thinking about the maximum number of servers that can be on, number of VMs that can be on a server. So notice I've got 8 VMs in each of these examples. If I tried to move the 2 VMs at the top to the server that only has 6 VMs, I'm still in license compliance because the license didn't move. I have 2 empty slots that I can put those servers in. Now, where I get restricted is if I had 8 VMs on that last host, I wouldn't be able to move any VMs over because I've reached my maximum. Here's where SA comes in. With SA, I get unlimited VMs. So it doesn't matter. I can move VMs freely between any fully licensed host that's licensed for SQL Server. Free movement of VMs, no problem, as long as they're moving to a licensed host. Now the difference here is that the VM can't move to an unlicensed host. So here's a situation where you might want to create a cluster, especially for those SQL Server VMs, or you might want to do subclustering and do host affinity to keep those VMs on licensed hosts. Okay? So here's the per host licensing example. Rainpole Bank is much bigger now. We've got 500 VMs. 50 of those VMs run SQL Server. 16 of the SQL servers are in AAG clusters. We got 34 standalone. The SQL Server VM is configured between 4 and 16 vCPUs, and we're seeing an average of 30% VM utilization during peak hours. A lot of variation there. I think that's pretty common too. We did a capacity planner study a few years back to show the average utilization of a SQL Server. It ranged between 6 and 11%. A lot of SQL servers are very underutilized, so excellent targets for consolidation. And our ESX hosts have 32 physical cores with hyperthreading. Our answer here, license all the physical cores on all ESX hosts that will run SQL Server. You can use a vSphere cluster, or you can use host affinity. Keep all those VMs on the same set of licensed hosts. You want to spread your always-on availability groups across multiple ESX hosts to maximize your availability, and then purchase SA to allow your unlimited VMs per host, allowing free movement among those clustered ESX hosts. Let you get your picture before I move. All right. So what about containers? Anybody using containers now in their environment? Very few, huh? Okay. Container licensing is the exact same thing. as VM licensing. Containers can be licensed with server cal or per core. Licenses can be applied to each container or the entire physical host, and they follow the same restrictions. 4-core minimum, increased licenses in 2-core increments. If a container is licensed, software assurance is required for free movement, and if the host is licensed, the maximum number of containers equals the maximum number of cores. SA gives you unlimited. Exactly the same rules. So here's a consolidation example, and I said you can save money. These are not real numbers. These are numbers from a few years back, but they were accurate at one time. If I had 10 physical SQL servers, and they're each 2 by 8, so you have 16 cores, I have a total of 160 cores that I need to license. My average utilization is 15%. What I can do is take those 10 physical servers, consolidate them onto 2 ESX hosts. That brings my average host utilization up to 75%, but now I'm only licensing 32 cores instead of 160. I did a bunch of these projects back in the early 2000s where I would go into a customer site, I would monitor their entire SQL environment, I would consolidate on as few servers as possible. I would get sometimes 80–90% consolidation rates by taking a look at that. So I would invite you to consider that. You can save money on your SQL Server licenses, and the best thing there is you can use that money to do other things, to fund other projects within your organization. I mean, going from 1.3 million to 400K in this example, it's a 70% cost reduction. You could, yeah, you could. So availability and recovery rights. If you're covered by active SA, you can run up to the same number of passive failover instances hosted on premises. Okay, so let's break that down a little bit. I have an active SQL server, and I have a passive SQL server, which means no users are connected to the SQL server. I'm allowed to have one passive according to SA, and I don't have to license that passive, as long as it's not in the cloud. We'll cover that in a minute. So I don't have to license one passive, but if I have 2 passive, 3, and 4, I have to license 2, 3, and 4, okay? One passive is allowed. If you have primary SQL servers on premises and the passive secondaries in the cloud, the secondaries must be licensed as well. I've got 3 scenarios I'll go through with you on the next slide. If you're licensing the VM, SA gives you license mobility, which gives you access to VMware HA, vMotion, DRS, and things like that. Now, when it comes to VMware features, here you might want to take a look at these. So if you have HA, and you have a SQL Server license at the primary host, do you need it at the secondary host for failover? Technically, no, but you can't fail it back because of the 90-day rule. That's a no with a little 1 beside of it. You can use VMware HA to fail over to the secondary host, but without SA, you can't fail back within 90 days. Yes, sir? If it's hardware failure, then if it's permanent hardware failure, then yes, that 90 days is waived. Yeah. vMotion, you need licenses on both, or you need SA to allow license mobility. Fault tolerance, you need licenses on both. And Site Recovery Manager, you only need, as long as you're failing back with SA, you don't necessarily need a license at the secondary host. So when your passives are located in the cloud, a passive SQL Server is one that is not serving SQL Server data to clients or running active SQL Server workloads. That's right from the licensing guide. So we have 3 scenarios here. 1, everything's on premise. I have an active SQL Server with 8 cores. I have a passive with 8 cores. I only need to buy 8 cores worth of licenses. I only need to license the active version. And this is also the same, I should have put this in the slide. If we slid all that over to the cloud, if both instances are in the cloud, I still only need 8 core licenses. Scenario 2, everything's in the cloud. Oh, I did put it there, great. So I put everything in the cloud. As long as they're both in the cloud, the active and the passive, I only need 8 core licenses, okay? Last scenario, hybrid. I want my active on-premise, I want my passive in the cloud, I have to license both. So, some key takeaways. Analyze your environment. Pick the best model that's right for your business, that's going to save you the most money. Look at your investment in client access licenses. Really take some time to analyze this because you can find a lot of savings. If licensing by VM, minimum of 4 virtual cores. Remember, not all VMs need that much power. Make sure your VM's fully loaded to avoid wasting licenses. Stack instances on there until you reach 70%. Software assurance is required for unlimited mobility. If you use always on, separate your cluster members on separate ESX hosts, give you the best availability. If you have enough VMs to fill 1 or more ESX hosts, consider licensing the hosts instead of the VMs. That way you avoid that underutilization of the VM, you get maximum virtualization density, and you have the option to move amongst any licensed hosts. A lot of folks do this in separate SQL clusters. Some will use host affinity. Be careful with your passive SQL Server strategy in the cloud to avoid your license non-compliance. Remember, if you have on-prem and in the cloud, your passive also has to be licensed. And verify everything with your Microsoft rep. We don't want to tell you anything wrong here. This is our opinion. This is what we have interpreted from the licensing guide. So definitely verify with your Microsoft rep. I'm available after the session to answer any questions you might have. I'm also available for calls. If you get with your sales rep, they know how to find us. I'm happy to go on a call and talk to you if you want me to talk to your DBA or whatever the case is. So really appreciate your attention today, and thank you for coming.
I have one question, if I may ask.
Okay.
In the actual scenario, when you are using it in passive mode, if something
Can you stand up at the speak? Sorry.
Can we actually hold the question until the Q&A section?
We'll hold till the end.
Yeah, let's do that.
Sounds great.
Just for continuity. Thank you. Scott's an institution. It's an honor for me to speak with him. I want to get 2 things out of the way very quickly that he has said having to do with Microsoft licensing that do not apply to Oracle licensing. First and foremost, do not validate your Oracle license privileges with your Oracle sales rep. What did I say? I'm serious. At the end of this session, you're going to know more about how the Oracle license actually works than the vast majority of full-time Oracle professionals, including salespeople, that you have ever encountered. Secondly, the Oracle template contract contains no gating factor. You can shift an Oracle license. You can uninstall it and reinstall it between servers as often as you would like. Thirdly, in an Oracle environment, we do not recommend that you comply with all Oracle licensing policies. What did I say? Because some of those policies that we're going to talk about are contrary to what's in your contract, and they are locked out by the contract's entire agreement clause. 3 key differences between Oracle and Microsoft as you're listening to Scott's comments and mine. Yes, we do recommend that you validate what we are representing, not with your Oracle sales rep, but with your legal counsel, who we are very happy to get on the phone with. All right, Oracle on VMware. It's actually very license friendly, contrary to what your Oracle sales rep may have told you. It's audit secure. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time. All right. How many of you have heard about the Oracle lawsuit that was received from Mars Corporation? Okay. The rest of you will educate you about it. And by the way, how many of you are running Oracle workloads on VMware? How many of you have been through an Oracle audit And I'm not talking about contractually where you've got to do the annual true-up for your headcount or your revenue. I'm talking about a formal Oracle audit. How many of you have been through what the Oracle sales team likes to call a soft audit? Okay. Q&A. All right. The Mars lawsuit, 6th largest privately held company in the United States, according to Forbes, pierced the NDA to bring a lot of things into the public environment that had not been previously available, including this assertion. Oracle represented that in a VMware environment, you have to license all the VMware servers because of a manufacturer's design capability for live migration. What they're saying is that installed includes everywhere that you might go to, but you haven't yet gone to. This was one of 2 causes of action by Mars in the lawsuit. Okay? All right. This is the most important slide that you Oracle folks are going to see during this entire show. At the end of this slide, we could close shop and you could all go home. And if you retain this, you will be okay. This statement is in your Oracle License and Services Agreement template beginning with around 2000. This identically worded statement is in your latest and greatest Oracle Master Agreement. And I quote, and if I encounter you 2 years from now in the street, I'm going to ask you, even if I don't remember your name and you don't remember mine, to quote me this sentence. Processors shall be defined as all processors where the Oracle programs are installed and/or running. Please memorize that. You will find no language or any other thing in your contract or the policy documents that it integrates by direct reference that qualify that. Installed is past tense or present tense, depending on the context. Running is clearly present tense. There is no obligation in your contract to pay for a capability that you may never exercise. Furthermore, Oracle will ask you for, but has no right to receive any information about your operations, your tooling, or your technical boundaries. What DRS host affinity must rules you may have in place, what vMotion VLAN boundaries you may have in place, what SAN mapping zoning boundaries you may have in place are none of Oracle's contractual business. The Oracle audit clause in the contract entitles Oracle to audit your use of the programs. You're obligated to prove to them where they currently are, and if Oracle dares ask, where they have been in the past. In our observation, Oracle has gotten out of the habit of asking about the history for the last 4 years. Why? It seems to us that to ask for history is a logical contradiction to their non-contractual assertion that you've got to license the entire farm. They have the contractual privilege to ask about history, but it's been a long, long time since we've seen them ask. All right? Most important slide I've got for you. Nothing even compares to this. All right, let's talk about policy documents. There are a bunch of them, and I wish I had time to get into them. I do have this slide with full narrative behind it. If you give either me or Jim Ogborn, please wave your hand, your business card. Before the end of the day, I will get you a deck that has the speaker notes in it associated with this. Partitioning policy document was initiated by Oracle around 2002, and it states 2 things. First off, that you can't use VMware to subdivide the cores within a single server that you want to license for Oracle. The document also states that you can't subdivide a subset of a cluster and only licensed the subset of the cluster. Ferrara, Italy, 1978, 12:30 in the afternoon in the wintertime. The country closes every day for 3 hours. Even the school kids go home. And I was waiting in line behind a female merchant at the bank, and the male teller was counting her deposit for the morning. And they were conversing, and suddenly he stopped, and without even looking at the bill, he backed up one and began speaking as he was raising it to the light. E bello ma è falso. It's beautiful, but it's false. The Oracle partitioning policy document is extremely well formatted. It's precise, it's clear, it's impossible to misunderstand. It is not referenced in your contract, and therefore is locked out by your contract's entire agreement clause. E bello ma è falso. Be aware of it, but you need pay it no heed. Licensing in the cloud computing environment is a similar policy document, but this one grants privileges that aren't in the contract. Oracle has been marketing with this since Oracle Open World 2008. They incarnated this in a nice policy that they've updated. It gets more restrictive since 2010. Okay? You can grant privileges in a non-contractual document, especially if you've been selling with that privilege for 11 years. Nathan Biggs, our CEO, that I hope you will meet today at 1 p.m. in Breakers D in a session that I'm going to talk to you about. He and Pam Fulmer, one of the attorneys that we work with, they were invited by the Northern California Oracle User Group to write a paper on licensing in cloud environments. And Pam notes, A, that the cloud licensing policy has never been challenged in a court because Oracle's never denied it. They've stood by it consistently. And the other thing is, she said if it were ever challenged in a court by Oracle, they probably would be, and I'm quoting her now, legal language stopped from denying that privilege. Anyway, what's the bottom line here? House of Brick encourages you to use that policy. Now, this slide's complex. It's a reference slide. I'm going to give it a brief explanation, then I'm going to let you think about it for a moment and look at it while I pause. This slide describes your licensing privileges across the 5 Amazon AWS offerings. Whether you're leveraging the cloud licensing policy that instead of paying for the entire server's cores, allows you to pay for just the vCPUs that you're using, whether you're using traditional licensing, or whether you're using unlimited license amendments. The X's describe where you can't use that licensing model, and the check marks describe where you can. Again, I'm going to have full narrative behind this on a PDF version of this deck, and if you give either me or Jim Ogborn your card, I'll have this to you before the end of the day. All right. Published today by House of Brick, Oracle Workload Total Cost of Ownership, comparing VMware Cloud on AWS to the Oracle Cloud, and there's the URL. Okay. Mars dismissed their lawsuit inside 8 calendar weeks of when it was filed. Now, I calculated that Mars, with 2,000 database instances, easily would have paid $100 million to Oracle in the period 2013, 14, and 15. And the Rimini Street filing, where Oracle sued Rimini Street, if Oracle has legal standing, they have no hesitation at all going to court. Oracle was challenging them because they were a gray market provider and they were stealing, was the allegation, Oracle's intellectual property and distributing it in ways that they weren't entitled to distribute. Compare the 2 filings. Oracle was very happy for the Rimini Street filing to go on for 5 years. But look at how quickly the Mars suit was dismissed. Within 8 calendar weeks before it could get anywhere near a courtroom. Very significant. Call to action at the show. Guys, I've got news for you. The VMware Village closes today at 12:45. Lunch is closed today at 12:45. So what are you going to do with your time? You're going to be in Breakers D meeting. No, I'm lying. They're really open. But you really do want to be in Breakers D meeting Art Beeman and Joel Muchmore, the two attorneys outside counsel that prosecuted that filed the Mars lawsuit for Mars Corporation. They're here. They have a very compelling story to tell, and I recommend that you pile into that session. All right. Here is the total number of lawsuits that Oracle has filed since the dawn of time against any VMware user running Oracle in any jurisdiction on the face of the planet. The slide is fully animated. I talked to somebody from a very large, internationally renowned organization this morning as we were getting introduced in this room, who said, yeah, man, but our organizations, they're just afraid of being, of being sued. Surely, if anything about the outcome of the Mars filing that led to its dismissal was remotely in Oracle's favor, Oracle would have cherry-picked weak gazelles in the herd and filed lawsuits during the ensuing 32 months since it was dismissed to protect its intellectual property rights. Since Oracle has no right to insist that you license VMware prospectively, they've been perfectly silent in the courts, and their silence with every passing month screams all the more loudly. So I've got other metaphors, again, in the deck that I'll share with you if you give me my card. I don't have time for it now, but Sudhir Balasubramanian from VMware in January of 2017 did a brilliant blog post. And he said, if Oracle's position on this had any merit, you would be responsible to provide licenses for every other VMware user running Oracle all the way up and down the street, because vCenter and SSO domains are no barrier whatsoever to vMotion. Brilliant. Pam Fulmer, another law firm that we work with, did a blog post that you all need to read, including show it to your legal, show it to your procurement and contracting. July 6th, 2017. I've got the reference to this at the end of the deck. 3 customers that I picked randomly. Oracle comes in at the audit with a shock value, many, many times more than House of Bricks' actual contractual assessment of what you really owe. Notice the number of significant digits that are different. I could have put up customers that owe nothing, but this illustrates. Then Oracle Sales comes along and they put their arm around you and they go, you know what, let us save you from big bad license management services. If you buy these cloud credits or this EULA for 1/3 to 1/8 what you really owe us, I'll make sure that this audit goes away. The problem is, what they're asking you to sign is still many, many times more than what you actually owe. Would you believe that Oracle has no desire in our observation to complete any of these audits? They want to permanently defer these audits with a sales event. How many of you own Oracle Unlimited license amendments currently or have been in one in the past? Okay. How many of you own Oracle Cloud credits? Okay. All right. So, Lake Manawa Sailing Association, I'm tired of sailing my 11-foot styrofoam dinghy and got serious about sailing. Took lessons this summer. They put me in this 2-man racing sloop that had been out of the water for 4 years for maintenance. Many, many people volunteered experts' time to find all the missing parts and get this thing rigged. I put it in the water for the first time in 4 years, 2 weeks ago. Went out and raced it, and I was pulling in some pretty nice compliments having to do with how I was maneuvering in the first 2 heats. In the 3rd heat, the horn went off, and my boat was sinking. The water came all the way up to the gunnels. I stood up trying to stabilize it. Nothing I could do. The mast and the sails came down in the water. I stood on the center board and pulled on the gunnel with all my might to try and right it. It was not going to come back up. The race committee boat towed me to shore after the race was over. And as soon as we got that stern out of the water, sure enough, here came this 2-foot arc of garden hose with water that ran solid for 20 minutes. We had forgotten that the plug was missing. We calculate that I had been dragging around out there 800 to 1,000 pounds of ballast. We were all shocked that I could maneuver in the first 2 heats at all. Now, we've all had enough PowerPoint today. I'm going to blank the screen for this next point. Those of you that are dragging around bare metal hardware behind your Oracle instances, you like we, before we discovered VMware in 2005, you can maneuver. You can get good stuff done. But some of what you need to do that comes down without notice, that's mission critical, you're going to be as unable to compete in that heat as I was. I didn't leave until 9:30 that night cleaning up the mess. And no, I didn't complete the race. Oracle on VMware, license friendly, audit secure. It really is time. So this is me, concept founder of House of Brick Technologies. I lead the Oracle license practice at House of Brick. I spend about 80% of my time in Oracle audit defense. And former Oracle database, parallel server, rack guy, dating back all the way to 1994. House of Brick, we've been at it for a long time. We're the grandfather in the Oracle on VMware licensing industry. Key to our services is managed license support services, and I'm going to jump straight to that. We prepare your people with accurate information. We validate and baseline your compliance, and then we monitor to make sure that you stay that way. Nathan Biggs, our CEO, did a landmark blog post just a few days ago about the need for all 3 pillars, our people to interface and mind meld with your people, our processes that are world leading to integrate with your workflows, and then our tooling. Very important. Take the House of Brick Oracle Managed License Support Services quiz at that URL with your legal, your procurement, your contracting, and your senior management. You may be fine without the service, but then again, you may need it. Unlimited license amendments. Many of you who have EULAs might not even understand that when you sign that EULA, even after you go back to quantity-based license, you are perpetually obligated to pay that annual total support stream regardless of your reduction of utilization of license. We, in 75% of our EULA customers, we can get them out of that with a very proximate, attractive break-even. Some of them, $0 break-even on a cash basis on day one. So once again, the call to action at this session, here are URLs that I strongly recommend that you have a look at, including everything that I have referenced during this. And here are 4 videos that I strongly recommend you take in. If you cannot get into the 1 p.m. session, at least take in Joel and Art, the attorneys from ours, their full 60-minute commentary of what they shared at the show in 2017 in a YouTube video. Thank you for your time, and we'll now go to questions. And starting with a gentleman who asked previously. Yeah, let's start with you for the SQL Server question.
Thank you. My question was, when you are in the HA mode, in the passive, when you utilize it, do you have to engage Microsoft for utilizing that service, or it is automated? It is.
No, okay, so you got host 1, host 2,
Yep.
the VM on host 1. Host 1 fails. You automatically do an HA event over to host 2. That's your one move in 90 days.
Yeah.
If you don't have, and if this comes back and you want to move it back, you need SA.
You need an SA, but do you need to contact Microsoft
No.
also for that? The software assurance is enough for that.
Software assurance is enough, yeah.
Okay. So step to the mic, please. Yeah.
Any chance you could go back to the slide with that assessment for the Oracle? Could you go back to the slide with your brick assessment for Oracle?
This one? Yeah. Okay. Easiest question I'll answer all day. Did you have a question for us, sir?
Yeah, on your licensing, you said if your secondary is in the cloud, you have to license both issues. But what if your primary is in the cloud and your secondaries in on-prem?
Same thing. Same thing.
Still
If they're in two different environments, you need to double your licensing. If they're in the same environment, you don't.
Okay.
Okay.
For licensing as a server for SQL, if you're licensing all the cores on each server, you can do that for standard as well, right?
You can, but you're limited to the lesser of four sockets or 24 cores.
Okay, with SA even?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
What are your thoughts on for SQL software assurance or Oracle disabling cores and or sockets in the BIOS and only license the activated cores?
Okay, the question, if I understand it, is what our opinion is on BIOS disabling cores or entire sockets to limit your Oracle license liability. Is that correct? Did I get it? I was the primary contributor to a white paper understanding certification, licensing, and support of Oracle and VMware environments, first published in 2015. Major revision that I drove in March of 2017. Published by VMware Corporation. You can imagine that VMware Legal reviewed that 15 ways from Sunday before it was published. I insisted that we include BIOS core disabling in that paper. The fact of the matter is, it is quite impossible to run or install Oracle software on a BIOS disabled core. You can't do it. So BIOS core disabling, which, by the way, in the Amazon AWS environment, the VMware Cloud for AWS environment, yesterday they announced that they're going to provide core disablement capability. Okay, and we're doing that. Their clusters are 3 servers in the cluster for VMware Cloud on AWS, 18 cores per server. That's a lot more power than a lot of the SMB market needs. So yeah, you bet, it's your privilege to BIOS disable a core because there's nothing in the Oracle contract that says you can't.
I concur with that on the Microsoft side. I would also say, though, that you should really take a look at trying to fill that server up before you decide to disable cores. But that's my only comment. Any other questions? Thank you guys so much. It's a pleasure.
Yeah.